would like to go back to being a normal husband. But I can't, because I can't breathe. I can't walk. People say that's an act. Let me try to stand up. Let me try to stand up. Exactly.
Is it you?
No. No, it's not me. I don't own a jumper like that, nor would I ever insult myself by wearing that shirt with that jumper.
I mean, I've got to give it to him. He genuinely is a con artist right up until capture. Even then, saying, yeah, it's not me. In particular, I'd never wear a jumper like that. I mean, that's the mark of all con artists, isn't it? It's definitely not me in that picture, and I'll tell you why. The fashion sense does not compute with my fashion sense. Wouldn't that just make you a con artist who was trying to make people feel that it wasn't you because it wasn't your fashion sense? No, I'm saying I would never be seen in a jumper like that, irrespective of the fact that's definitely me in the photograph. I kid you not. The case of Nicholas Rossi, well, it's almost fantastical in nature. If you haven't really heard about this case, strap in, it will blow your minds. And for those of you who do know this case, please stay. I guarantee I'm going to tell you more information than you already had on it. It begins on the 13th of December 2021. And this is when a very strange turn of events has occurred. A man in a Glasgow hospital lies hooked up to oxygen. And at this point, this particular individual is calling himself Arthur Knight. You can imagine in the UK, Arthur Knight's quite a strong name, isn't it? The name of a king, and in fact, a knight being the second name. What more could you want? But this guy isn't in the best of health. He's frail, he's apparently wheelchair bound, and he's this academic from Ireland. And even though he's presenting to the staff in this way, well, the thing about our bodies is they can tell a story, all without us moving our lips, particularly where our fingerprints are involved, and his fingerprints tell an altogether different story. He isn't Arthur Knight from Ireland. He's a fugitive. Not just a fugitive, he's a fugitive who's literally faked his own death. He's adopted a new identity. He's fled overseas to escape the FBI investigation on him. And his capture, complicated and challenging as it would be, literally unravelled one of the most audacious schemes in recent criminal history. The case of Nicholas Rossi is as bizarre as it is breathtakingly evil. Let's talk about the individual in this case, who was several individuals, I would say. Because the thing about Nicholas Rossi is he had several aliases. He was actually born Nicholas Alaverdian, but he didn't use that throughout the media. We know him more as Nicholas Rossi. So for the purposes of this content today, I'm going to be referring to him as Rossi. Now, he was born on the 11th of July, 1987 in Providence, Rhode Island, USA. And it was not an easy start. So we're going to absolutely engage in the reality that Nicholas Rossi had a challenging start to his life. His parents were abusive. Apparently they were alcoholic and they genuinely couldn't take care of him. He ends up getting placed in the care of Rhode Island Department of Children, Youth and Family Services, so DCYF, as many of us know it. And David Rossi, who is his stepfather, he admitted that he did beat him. In fact, in a 2024 interview, he said, "I would hit him like a man would hit another man," which is harrowing beyond belief and highly traumatizing for a young person. And whilst we are not going to afford the perpetrator in this case any empathy as the adult he's become, I do think it's really important to explore trauma and to consider the impact that trauma can have on a child who maybe feels that they are not wanted, not cared for, not validated, and in fact beaten to a pulp. You can imagine wanting to extricate yourself from that beginning. Now, in a very extreme form, one could argue, I don't want to be that person that I used to be. I want a different life. I want to carve it out for myself. And so taking on other aliases, changing names, could be a psychological reaction to that state of affairs. But it doesn't excuse what we're going to look at today. Now, after he is discharged from a treatment program, which is meant to help him because of his terrible start in life and the problems he was emitting at that time, Rossi does briefly go back to his family home, but he's then again removed and placed back with DCYF. So again, very much that coming and going from the family is going to create attachment issues, it's going to be abandonment issues there, and it's a very unhealthy, destabilizing place to arrive at in your life when you are a young person. So Rossi said that for a period of 15 months, this began in March 2002, the DCYF would place him in their night to night program, in which he spent 3 days at DCYF building in Pawtucket and also nights at one of several shelters around Rhode Island. These include Central Falls, Providence, Narragansett, or Woonsocket. And he said during that period of time, he didn't actually go to school, which would be a real failure because clearly it's important to be educating children, particularly those from dysfunctional backgrounds. It can give them a sense of consistency in their life. And he said that during this period of time, other kids stole his belongings, they'd threaten him, they'd assault him during this particular period of his life. So a horrendous place to be. Now, the night to night program has actually been described as a really stifling period. And it's agreed that Rossi was denied a substantial chunk of his childhood. So again, that adds insult to traumatic injury. It really does. There is no consistency, there's no security, there's no sense of safety, and it feels like an incredibly challenging period that any of us would struggle with enduring. Now, Rossi said that Rhode Island basically shipped him far from home as a teenager. And he said that, at least in his early years, that was something that he wanted to prevent happening to others. It was a practice he'd spent trying to reform. Now, aged 15, he sent to residential facilities for troubled youth in Nebraska and later Florida. And the quote is, "These are the most vulnerable people in Rhode Island, and we're spending all this money to ship them across the country." He described the policy on reflection as an inhumane approach to a human problem. And I think we can all agree with that. It's horrific to just send kids off to another part of the country. They don't know the area, the environment. They already have all of this dysfunction. That is not a helpful scenario to play out. Now, in those placements, apparently he struggled with physical abuse, emotional abuse. I would tell you that Rhode Island officials later said there were no records to prove Rossi was abused in care, but can we be real? But of course, how often do you see in the press care homes being brought to and called to account because they didn't keep notes on these things? Because let's be clear, if you are abusing a kid in a care home, the last thing you're likely to do is pop to the office and be like, I'm just going to write about the abuse that I just inflicted on this child. It's not going to occur. So the idea that they can't find evidence of it doesn't mean that it didn't play out. And very often these placements can feel very dangerous for children. Now, the DCYF did acknowledge concerns about one facility, so they stopped using the Florida program Manatee Palms Youth Service. That was in 2005 because of concerns that they had with the way they were treating the kids there. So that does absolutely give weight to Rossi's concerns and complaints about those environments. Now, Rossi does return to Rhode Island in 2005, and he actually spent his final foster year in a semi-independent living program. This is when he was finishing high school. But he's had a very challenging start to life all the way through to his late teens, and that is going to have a huge amount of emotional collateral that goes with it. Now, some would say this makes sense, that Rossi becomes a political activist. You know, he's had this difficult childhood. He thinks that things need to change. He doesn't want other kids to go through what he has been through. So when he's 14 years of age, this is whilst he's still in DCYF care, he's actually hired as a legislative page in the Rhode Island House of Representatives, which is a big deal at the age of 14. Also, it kind of speaks to you about the fact he'll have a level of charisma. He's obviously relatively charismatic and eloquent in the way that he presents himself, and that's going to bode well for him in these kind of situations. Also, it speaks of a level of confidence and self-belief. And it suggests that in spite of his environments, in spite of his challenges, he's still managed to retain, shall we say, a confidence about his nature, which is pretty rare in these kind of situations. Now, he said during that period of time, it was his job to inform lawmakers about all the negative experiences that he'd had in DCYF care, and basically wanted to explore the fact that if he'd had some assistance back then, he could have had a better experience. So it's just about informing them about good practice. Now, a guy called Brian G. Coogan, who was Rhode Island representative at the time, he said, I felt really sorry for this kid. I actually felt compelled to give him a better opportunity, and he actually took action to formally adopt him. And that says something unbelievably about Brian. I mean, to see this young person who's no longer a child, they're going through adolescence. We all know that that can be a very challenging time on an individual level. Also add destabilized background, dysfunction, trauma, and you can often introduce a child into your home that's got a lot of issues, and absolutely we need people to do that. But it's no simple feat in that moment. And he was actually warned off adopting Rossi by family court chief judge Jeremiah. Jeremiah said, Rossi will try to undermine you and turn your family upside down. And with respect, that can definitely happen when these kind of placements occur. But ultimately, when you have people who are highly compassionate, understanding, empathic, and also experienced, these children's lives can be turned around. They may have learned all of this behavior through their experiences. They may not trust authority, so why will they trust you? But it can have such positive effects when people take these children in. And I imagine that was why Brian was thinking, I can give this kid a great start. Now, Rossi soon positions himself as a child welfare reform advocate, and he does start lobbying for changes to the foster care system. He actually founded an organisation named Nexus Government, and the whole premise of this was to press for DCYF reform. So this is really pro-social stuff, this lobbying, this desire to make change. And if it carried on down that route, we'd be talking about Rossi in a completely different way today. Now, by 2011, apparently he's a really familiar presence at the Rhode Island State House. Often he's testifying in hearings, so this means that he's plausible. This means that people are reinforcing the fact that he has a place and position that's useful and helpful.
Madam Chair, you're the first chairperson to actually get that correct. Thank you so much. This is very important legislation. I've spent the past month and a half annoying each state legislator to make sure that kids are kept safe. That's a very worthy cause.
One agency that is under the umbrella of the Office of Health and Human Services is the Department of Children, Youth, and Families.
I'm new here. Just kidding.
Now, just imagine if you were being given all of this validation, but you're also, in your mind, developing this desire to become more con artist orientated. You can see that there are things within you that make you be able to exploit other people's good nature. This kind of validation, this kind of applause, this kind of permission base is going to mean that people will trust you. And that's going to give you ways in that can cause huge problems with the vulnerabilities that other people have in their world. And I genuinely think that even though on one level this is a breeding ground for potential for change in the areas that he wants to change, he's probably utilizing this more for his own ego. He wants people to see him as trusted. That's helpful to him. He wants people to see himself as validated, because that will mean that people just feel that he's a good person to have around. And it's just giving him in routes and opportunities to places that he can then go on to exploit. Think about Machiavellian individuals. Think about people who with narcissistic intent, people with antisocial personalities, etc., all culminating together in this space, knowing that if they can get those routes in, well, then they can absolutely exploit those people they meet along the way on every single level for their own gain. Certainly, it feels like Rossi has this within his nature. Think the dark triad of personality traits. Now, State Representative Roberto De Silva, he was so inspired by Rossi's testimony that in March 2011, he actually introduced a bill to curb the out-of-state placement of Rhode Island foster kids, which is amazing, and rightfully so. That should have happened, and Rossi has done good work there. But this measure was actually also seen as a cost-cutting step. Now, De Silva did credit Rossi's advocacy as the, quote, inspiration for the bill. The bill actually failed to pass in 2011. De Silva did resubmit it in 2012. It did get a hearing, but ultimately it failed because there was so much bureaucratic hesitation. But Rossi is at this point becoming really known for his absolutely persistent attitude. And he can be charming, he can be articulate, he's very, very charismatic, he sounds very eloquent, but also he has a relentlessness within his nature. And again, that can be very positive, but again, it can tell us that it's an individual who is unwilling to accept the words no. Now, if that just happens to be in the business you work in and it can get you places that you need to go, for example, in social reform, good. But if you translate that incapacity to hear and accept the words no, and you put it into your personal life, well, that is a cooking pot of possibility and future disaster for the people unfortunate enough to get in a relationship with you. Now, former Representative Ray Hull said, Rossi would just beat you down with constant pressure to act on his ideas. So again, there is a relentlessness, but there is a lack of understanding others' personal boundaries, and that does not bode well. And indeed, in early 2020, Rossi actually convinced a group of 4 legislators, including Hull, to introduce an Emergency Oversight Commission bill. And this was basically to investigate DCYF for unconstitutional and unsafe practices. So he called for a special legislative commission to probe the agency and to go ahead and report the findings by May 2021. Now, that doesn't actually go anywhere. It was never voted on. It actually died in committee. And one of the reasons for that as well is that Rossi just disappears, just vanishes from public view in 2020. So pushing all of these things, but then literally disappears off the face of the planet. Now, some people behind the scenes who dealt with Rossi professionally said there was just something off about him. There was something, they put it as, amiss behind the veneer of his activism. And the allegations were that he just swindled a lot of people. They claimed that Rossi manipulated lawmakers into giving him money. In fact, in one case, Brian Coogan stated that he implicitly threatened to accuse people of acts like rape or assault if they didn't comply. And I get that for a lot of us, we would think, well, just go straight to the police, because at the end of the day, the police are going to have him done for trying to extort money by threatening in these ways. It's blackmail. But we were living in a time, particularly 2020, 2021, where the Me Too movement had occurred. And whilst that's really positive on many levels, because of course women should be believed when they complain about things happening, for the most part, not all women, but for the most part, we also have to think about the political climate and the shift in believing victims, to a point where if somebody said to you, I'm going to accuse you of raping me or abusing me, many men would be terrified by that, because they think, well, I didn't, but he said, she said, or he said, he said. It's those feelings that often make people feel unable to actually complain to the authorities and say, look, somebody's threatening me. It's the no smoke without fire belief system. So to some degree, what Rossi has done, he's found this loophole where he doesn't have to prove anything, but he can absolutely go ahead and threaten people with the fallout if he goes to the authorities and complains about them. And another former state representative, Joanne Jani, they recalled Rossi constantly asking for cash to support the advocacy projects that he was working on. And she said, at first I gave him money, but eventually I didn't have the money to give. I wanted to work with other projects, and he just was really angry. He lashed out, and she said he genuinely knew how to hurt you with words. Now, in 2011, this is when Rossi was 23 years of age, one of the things that he'd done was he'd filed this sweeping federal lawsuit against the Rhode Island DCYF. Now, these things take years and years and years to ever get to the courts, if they ever do. And what he wanted in that particular case was for the abuse that he suffered as a child to have accountability taken for it. So the suit didn't just name DCYF, but also the states of Florida and Nebraska. These are the places he was sent as a kid. Also 6 residential treatment facilities and 18 individual officials and care providers. So it's a big old suit. Even Rhode Island's sitting governor at the time, Donald Cassiari, and family court judge Jeremiah were listed as defendants. Now, Rossi testified in the case, and what he said was he alleged that DYCF deliberately sent him out of state because he was basically a source of information on DYCF, and they just wanted to silence his complaints. And he said that during that time, in those very distant facilities he was placed at, he wasn't allowed to contact outsiders, so no calls to media, lawyers, or even to the state child advocate. Now, Rhode Island officials disputed the vast majority of his claims. They said, look, there was no evidence to support the claim that you were abused in care. And as we all know, doesn't mean he wasn't abused in care. We know how these big authorities pull together, defend one another, often at the detriment of those they're meant to provide care for. But after 2.5 years, Rossi's lawsuit did get to a resolution. That happened in August 2013. Never went to trial because the parties reached a settlement. So Rhode Island basically agreed to waive a debt of over $200,000 in medical and care expenses that it incurred on Rossi's behalf. And in exchange for that, he had to dismiss the lawsuit. Now, the DCYF didn't admit any wrongdoing. That was part of the settlement. The agency explicitly denied liability or culpability. And Rossi signed an agreement releasing Rhode Island and its employees from any future liability over the matter. Now, full details of any compensation Rossi might have received beyond the debt waiver, they weren't actually disclosed. But we do know that Rossi also agreed to drop 2 other pending suits that he'd filed. That was one accusing DCYF of violating a confidentiality agreement and another against Rhode Island sheriff deputies. So he was going for it in a lot of areas. Now, by 2013, Rossi publicly declared victory. He framed the outcome as justice for himself and also proof that the system failed. But let's just be real, guys. In reality, he actually just escaped a sizable debt. He got quite a lot of public sympathy, but it didn't mean that those core abuse claims had been proven in court because they settled. And I do appreciate that when people get to a point, I'm suing the NHS at the moment in the UK, and what people have to understand is often when they know they're in the wrong, they will settle because it's going to be much cheaper than going to the court and chancing it being found in the claimant's favour. Then it costs a ridiculous amount of money. So what they will often say is, look, we're going to agree to pay certain costs. We're going to say, okay, we agree that things didn't work out how you wanted them to work out, but we're not actually admitting that we are liable. We're not saying we're guilty. And a lot of people will accept that because they don't want to go to court. It's quite traumatic and they don't want a chance losing. And even though for the person who's the claimant, it's still a victory, you can't go out there and really say what you want because part of what you agreed is to be quiet and move on. And you can kind of say, well, they settled and therefore I feel it's a victory, but it's not quite the victory that you would get if you were taken to court and won there. Now, in 2008, this is around the same time that Ross is gaining recognition at the State House, one of the things that he was also concealing was a very dark facet of his personality. Because in January 2008, 20-year-old Rossi sexually assaults a woman in Ohio. Now, this incident takes place at Sinclair Community College in Dayton. This is where Rossi meets a student on campus. He just chats to her over lunch, and then he says, let me walk you to class. But he doesn't walk her to class. He leads her into a basement stairwell. He then pins her against the wall, he gropes her, he then masturbates in front of her. And when she resists because she's in the most traumatic situation that she could ever have imagined, he tells her, I'm almost done, don't be a bitch. Now just think about that. He has no care, no concern, no compassion or empathy for this victim, who he has literally dragged to the basement and is now forcing her to be engaged in a non-consensual sexual act. And yet, because she's obviously saying she doesn't want to do this, he basically says, oh, just be quiet, let me finish, don't be a bitch. Because she is just something that he requires in that moment for some kind of sexual experience that he feels she should witness, even though she doesn't want to be there, and that he gets a great amount of titillation from because he knows she doesn't want to be there. Now, apparently he apologizes to her later, and the reason that he said he did it was because she was so beautiful. So it's all her fault. He couldn't help it, apparently. At the end of the day, with you walking around looking so beautiful, what do you expect aside from men pushing you into basements and forcing you to watch them masturbate? I mean, surely, if you're that beautiful, it should just be commonplace. So he victim blames and he tries to use this flattery as a reason to shut her up. And he tells her, don't tell anyone, but she understandably knows that what's happened is absolutely diabolical and wrong. She does report the attack to the police very bravely. It's absolutely terrifying for women in these situations. They often feel they won't be taken seriously, and it's embarrassing. It actually feels humiliating to have to say those words to police officers. Now, Rossi is arrested. He was convicted on 2 misdemeanor counts, public indecency and sexual imposition. I don't really think that they were strong enough. I think he should have got a custodial sentence because it really worries me about the escalation in these kind of actions, and we need to clamp down real hard consequentially on these kind of predators. Now, his conviction required him to register as a sex offender. What does he do? Tried to overturn the conviction. Of course he did. So his main thing was to concoct a story and a scheme to just discredit his victim. So what he did is he produced a MySpace post in which she was apparently admitting that she'd lied about the assault. Now, they got a forensic computer expert who examined the evidence, and this was in a 2011 hearing, and that forensic expert testified with 90% certainty that the MySpace message had been altered or indeed entirely fabricated. And also, imagine being a victim who's gone to court, the person's been found guilty, is on the sex offenders register, and then you're just putting it out on your MySpace or made it all up. I mean, please. Let's just think about that for a second. This was an intelligent woman who'd been traumatized. The last thing she's going to go and do is put things out there that would get her into trouble. Now, there was a motion for a new trial requested, but it was denied and the conviction stood, rightly so. But what does it tell you about the kind of person who would be going to those lengths to try to make the victim seem guilty and to try to get off for a crime that he actually committed? The arrogance, the superiority, like I said, the Machiavellian style within his nature is absolutely shining through. So at this point, Ross is like, well, I'm not having it. So he turns to civil litigation. So in 2013, this is whilst he's also suing DCYF in Rhode Island, Rossi sues Sinclair College and the Dayton court that handled his case and accused them of perpetrating false allegations against him and violating his rights. Now, in August 2013, that was dismissed as meritless because it was meritless, and Rossi even sued his Ohio victim directly. In fact, he accused her of libel because she described him as crazy. Just going to throw it out there. Why do you think that she called you crazy? Well, I don't know, but it's not appropriate. It's defamatory. It's libelous. Could it be that you literally took her to a basement, forced her to watch you masturbate, and then basically told her it was her fault because she was just too beautiful? That's all seeming very rational to my mind, which is why she called you crazy, because you're a little bit on the crazy side, stroke evil side, stroke malevolent, stroke dark triad side of this world. By the way, you should file a suit against me now as well. I probably would, wouldn't he, if he had the chance? Now, the court again tosses that claim out in 2014. But he's not finished. No, he's not accepting that. So in response to this, Rossi wrote an essay titled, My Personal 9/11. Just let that sink in. So he has sexually violated a woman. It's clear that he did that and traumatized her in a horrific way. But then he's tried to actually sue her through the courts because he feels that she's slurred him. And now, in spite of them all being his actions that have caused him this consequence, he's comparing his experience as a sexual predator during a crime as actually being affected in a way like 9/11. Like 9/11. Just like 9/11, where all those innocent people died. Apparently, it's the same for him, even though he's just a criminal sexual offender who's still alive. But yeah, apparently the Ohio victim ruined his life, ruined his aspirations. It wasn't him. It was just because she was too beautiful. What can she expect? How dare she not expect to walk through life not realizing that part of being beautiful is she is going to be violated by men all the time and she should just put up with it. It's mind-blowing. And I'm highlighting this because this is the kind of ego we are dealing with in this case. Now, in 2010, we see an escalation because Ross's behaviour isn't just isolated to that one case I've talked about. Police reports reveal an absolute pattern of domestic abuse and harassment in the years that follow. So 11th of November 2010, police in Rhode Island, they respond to a disturbance in an apartment that Rossi shares with his new wife. They'd actually just got married just 5 days before. That was on the 20th of November 2010. Now, the officers arrive at the address and they immediately hear that a woman's screaming. They can hear a man yelling. They then find that woman with red marks around her eye, her neck. She's got bruises on her arms. She's got swelling on her face. And inside, Rossi's frantic. He's apologising. He's saying, I'm sorry. Can we talk about this? She then tells the police that he'd grabbed her, he'd knocked her to the floor, he'd held her down, he'd slapped her in the face when she tried to leave. Now, understandably, they arrest him on the spot. And then he's just really belligerent, really uncooperative. At one point, he's banging his head against the police car's partition bars. In the end, he had to be pepper sprayed to calm down. He was then charged and he later pled no contest to domestic simple assault. So again, a very violent predator. Also, in 2010, at least another 2 women in Rhode Island come forward with allegations against Rossi. Now, they don't immediately result in criminal charges, but clearly there are people who are struggling with any experience with this man. Then in July 2010, a woman told Pawtucket police that Rossi had lured her into his home, then just refused to let her leave. Then took a phone off her, threatened to kill himself if she left, and then tried to coerce her into sexual acts, demanding she sit on his lap and kiss him. Now, I'm just going to throw it out there. I'm sure a lot of us have had some very odd dates. You know, we've left early. We've got our friends to call us and pretend that we left the oven on. These things happen. But can you imagine you've just gone on a date or you've been chatting to somebody that you think's perfectly all right, and like, just come back to my house. Okay, I'll come back to your house. It'll be nice to have a cup of tea. And then the minute you get in, they're like, right, you're not allowed to leave. This isn't exactly what I was planning. You're not allowed to leave, and also I want your phone. I'm feeling a little bit unsafe now because you want to take my phone. No, you're going to feel really unsafe because if you don't do something sexual with me, I'm going to kill myself. I mean, if that is not the recipe for a modern good date, what could be? I mean, genuinely, imagine how terrifying that would be. I mean, with respect as well, I would be happier with him threatening to kill himself in that moment because I think I'd be like, well, that's on you. I'm definitely leaving. You make that choice. But the emotional blackmail, the taking off her phone, the threatening her, making her feel that something terrible is going to play out if she doesn't just go ahead and sit on his lap and kiss him. It's horrific. And again, what is it telling you about the mark of this human being? Now, finally, she does escape. She screams and screams and screams, and he lets her go. Now, Rossi's explanation to police was, I was depressed. I was just depressed. Now, I don't think this was washed in any way, shape, or form legally, and it's deeply disturbing that he thought that this was a potential defense. You literally imprisoned a woman. You threatened her, you stole her phone, you said if she didn't do something sexual with you, you were going to kill yourself. Yeah, but it's because I'm depressed. Oh, that's fine then. You just crack on. You know, it's ridiculous. Then December 2010, another woman comes forward, says she went to dinner with Rossi, went to his apartment. She repeatedly rebuffed his sexual advances. He then prevented her from leaving. Then he forced her to pay $200 and she had to record a video statement declaring that she wouldn't press charges and that the money was for his therapy. Literally, that happened. He made her record a video saying, look, I've just willingly given this money to him. It's for his therapy, as if anyone who just willingly gives money would need to do a video saying, I just willingly did it. Once she complied, he did let her go, but she's had money extorted from her and a very scary experience as well. Now, as I've noted, he was married in one of these events, and marriage is something, shall we say, that he tries a few times, but we'd expect that, wouldn't we, for an individual so unhinged. So his first marriage was the 5th of November 2010. That's, as I noted earlier, because of the violence, falls apart very quickly. And by May 2011, that first wife files for divorce. Understandably, she's got very good sense. She actually obtains a restraining order against Rossi, but of course, it's not going to wash with him, is it? He's continually harassing her with phone calls, so he doesn't accept no for an answer at all. October 2015, we have the second marriage. So Rossi meets his second wife in Ohio, and he does this through a Mormon singles congregation. At this point, he presents himself as this absolutely devout Mormon, and apparently, for those short period of time that they get together, they have this fairy tale relationship, but it morphs into a nightmare. Guess when? Yeah, the day after their marriage. Now, within 7 months of that marriage, she leaves, she moves to divorce him, and at an Ohio divorce court, they found Rossi guilty of gross neglect of duty and extreme cruelty. Again, He violates restraining orders, but she does get the divorce finalised in 2017, and at this point Rossi is ordered to repay his ex-wife $52,000. I don't imagine that she got it with respect. Now, the second wife later described Rossi as a smooth talker who turned frighteningly violent and controlling almost immediately after they married. And we know he was conning her. He wasn't a Mormon. He just wanted to use that as a way to get her involved in his life and to believe that he was equal to her in that respect. Now, she said once they got married, he became really paranoid, really abusive. He threatened her with a knife. He threatened suicide to manipulate her. He dictated how she dressed. He forbade her from leaving the house. He isolated her from friends and family. She also said that during that marriage, she was living in a constant state of fear. And no one can underestimate enough how powerful it is to have somebody say, I'm going to take my life unless you stay with me. Because particularly when you're in an intimate relationship, the last thing you want is for your partner to harm themselves, even if you're unhappy in the relationship. But what you really don't want to feel is that somehow your actions have led to their demise. So coercive controllers will use this. I'm the vulnerable one. I'm going to kill myself to make you feel like you're the one with some kind of emotional power. But all they've done is strip you of all of that emotional power, instead making you feel that ultimately you will be the reason why they will take their lives and kill themselves. And so it keeps people frozen. It's unbelievably manipulative. The truth is you can't make somebody take their own life. And in those situations, you have to be willing to say, well, that's on you, not on me. But very few people feel able to do so because they fear the guilt that would occur if that person went ahead and did take their own life. Now, by 2018, Ross's past is starting to catch up with him. He doesn't realise at that point, but the FBI begin investigating him for fraud. Now, one of the allegations came from within the family that once cared for him. So Sharon Lane, who is Ross's former foster mother, she accused him of having this massive identity theft scheme. She told the FBI that Rossi opened 22 credit cards in her husband's name. He racked up nearly $200,000 in debt before that scheme was discovered. Also, what does that say about the lack of respect that Rossi has for people who take him in and care for him? He doesn't care. They're just means to an end. Now, at this point, he becomes aware that the FBI have taken interest in those fraud allegations. He also realizes that means his arrest is imminent. And he doesn't want to get arrested. In fact, he doesn't want the FBI to know who he is anymore. So he decides that he's going to create a strategy to avoid capture. Now, according to Rossi's former lawyer, Jeffrey B. Pine, Rossi makes a bold decision to move to Ireland by late 2019. Now, this is going to hinder the attempts of the FBI to have him arrested because this is going to require international cooperation. Now, his actual location is unclear at this point. However, he told the Providence Journal that he and his family moved to Quebec, Canada. Now, a Rhode Island priest did recount one of Rossi's former wives saying that he had moved to Switzerland, and State Representative Raymond Hull of Rhode Island, they believed that Rossi's ex-wife said he moved to either Ireland or Germany. Now, the reason that this is very unhelpful to the investigators is they haven't got a clue where he could be. He could be any of those places. So those conflicting reports, they almost seem designed by Rossi to throw everybody off his scent. And his talent for deceit was massive. It extended to white-collar crime, for example, because he pulled off the most audacious con job on a Canadian businesswoman named Nafsika Antipas, because Rossi approaches her, basically says he's this high-level marketing expert. Now, he does this under another alias, Nicholas Knight Brown. Sounds very professional, doesn't he? Now, Nafsiska hires him with a generous $100,000 salary because she wants him to help promote her vegan lifestyle TV series. He does no work, but he just takes money off her more and more. Again, it's just drawing paychecks. Now, when Nafsika realizes he's a fraud and cuts ties with him, Rossi won't let it go, bombards her with abusive messages and threats, even spread lies about her online. That harassment did cease in June 2020, but by then he'd got $40,000 from her. So he's just absolutely extreme in his willingness to extort whatever he can from the people around him, emotionally, physically, and indeed economically. Now, this is when it gets even more bizarre. In January 2020, Rossi announces to Rhode Island media that he's been diagnosed with late-stage non-Hodgkin lymphoma. This is a really serious form of cancer. In fact, he personally contacted journalists and insisted that his illness be reported. Now, at the same time, he's pushing stories about being threatened by political enemies. He actually told an NBC journalist that he and his family had fled to Russia for safety and that he had terminal cancer. So he wants it to be out there. I'm really seriously ill, so seriously ill, who knows, I might die. Now, on the 29th of February 2020, which is a leap year day, Rossi's death was reported via an online obituary, and also there were statements coming from somebody claiming to be his wife. Now, this stated that Nicholas's battle for life had ended on February the 29th, 2020. And the obituary heralded him as a warrior for Rhode Island's foster children who had fought on the front lines for 2 decades. So he's basically a hero in this obituary. Described him as an author, as a child welfare advocate. They also said that his body was cremated and his ashes were scattered at sea. A little bit on the convenient side, you know. Any evidence of a body? No, we burnt him immediately and just threw his ashes at sea. Literally, you won't find anything. Nothing to see here, move on. But clearly, that makes it impossible to locate a grave or a body. Now, local news outlets, this included NBC 10 and WJAR, they did initially run stories mourning his death. Even some state lawmakers who knew Rossi paid tribute to him on the House floor. However, you won't be surprised to know that not everyone bought the story, because as you will see through the thread of what I've talked about so far, lots of people know that Rossi is a complete Walter Mitty, and worse, he's a sexual predator, he's a violent perpetrator, he's the kind of horrific human being that is going to leave a stain on many people's conscience. But he's also somebody who's managed to fabricate relationships by being the person they think he is versus the person he actually is. So those kind of people are speaking well of him. Now, the timing of Rossi's sudden demise also raised eyebrows. Bear in mind, just comes conveniently a few months after he learns of the FBI fraud investigation into him. Also, just weeks after Utah authorities charged him in a 2008 rape case. So the heat's on him, and now apparently he's dead, and he's been spread in the ocean. No one can ever find a trace of him. Now, Rhode Island State Police, they're not happy. So they open an inquiry mid-2020 to verify if Rossi is actually dead. Bear in mind, there is an active warrant for his arrest for failing to register as a sex offender in Rhode Island as well. By 2021, in the January of that year, that investigation hadn't actually found conclusive proof of death. So no death certificate, no independent confirmation, just the family's word and the obituary. Also, there's this shadowy figure of Louise, who's apparently Rossi's grieving widow. Now, in reality, Rossi had quietly married a third time to a woman in the UK. This is shortly before faking his death. So in early 2020, this is when he's in England, he got married to a woman named Miranda Knight. She apparently thought that Rossi was this charming Irish man. He told her that he was from Dublin. And bear in mind, Miranda's family had never even heard of Nicholas Rossi or Nicholas Alaverdian. Those original names were things they'd never heard of because he hid his real identity from her. Basically, he said he was his academic and PR consultant. Now, after Nicholas Rossi has orchestrated his fake death, one of the things we know is a woman calling herself Louise Alaverdian begins contacting Rhode Island media because they want to confirm this news. Yes, we want to confirm he definitely is dead. Don't send the FBI anywhere. He's absolutely dead. I can tell you he's dead because I'm his wife. Now, NBC 10 journalist, a guy called Peter Gavigan, he recalled Louise was really persistent, really aggressive about getting coverage of Rossi's death, just as Rossi himself had been when he was pushing it with reporters. Now, Gavigan immediately found this behaviour really odd, suspected that Louise was very likely Rossi seeking attention. Now, in fact, strong evidence later indicated that Louise was in fact Rossi's wife, Miranda, who's helping him at this moment to carry on with the hoax. Now, in a 2023 podcast, a British journalist confronts Miranda about allegations that she posed as Louise. Initially, she's like laughing, it's stupid, this is laughable, but The thing about podcasters is sometimes they can be very organised, can't they, with what they bring in? Because this particular podcaster confronts her with audio analysis of the voices. And an independent forensic voice analyst concluded that Louise and Miranda were the same person. And one of the reasons for that is she had a very specific Bristol accent. So the expert said it's implausible that any technological trick could fabricate such a consistent accent match. They are a little bit like signatures, aren't they? And it seemed that she didn't disguise her signature enough. Now, no official death certificate had been found at this point, and an Irish newspaper, Sunday World, actually reported in February 2021 that it had also searched Ireland's records and couldn't find any death certificate for Rossi. Now, in Rhode Island, a local Catholic priest came forward and said just a few months after that obituary had been written, Louise had asked him to hold a funeral mass for Rossi. Now, the priest, Father Bernard Healy, actually arranged the date, but then he was urgently contacted by a state police detective who said, cancel it, Nicholas is alive and he faked his death. Now, Father Healy remarked that the woman on the phone did have a, quote, suspiciously cartoonish, very high-pitched English accent. In fact, he actually joked that she sounded like Hyacinth Bouquet. Actually, her name is spelled Hyacinth Bucket. And it was a series that was in the UK called Keeping Up Appearances. And she had this very posh accent. And whenever you saw her, she was always trying to present her house very beautifully. And you'd be very scared about putting a cup of tea down on the surface because she'd always want to wipe it up because she's so very posh. But actually, she came from really ordinary means and background. And that's the actual ironic twist in that series. So clearly, it seems comical, the voice, which means that somebody's trying to disguise who they really are. Now, investigators also noted Rossi's online activity betrayed him, so his Wikipedia page, which, bear in mind, at this point mentions his supposed death, it was being edited by accounts linked to Rossi after his death date. So from the grave, from his own accounts, the page is getting edited. Now, one of those accounts even tried to change the profile photo on the page to someone else's image. Nothing to see here, it's not even me anymore. Now, to Michael Cockram, who actually monitored Wikipedia, it was just clear evidence that Rossi was alive and that he was desperately trying to erase or distort his digital footprint. Got to give it to him. This guy is consistent in his refusal to accept reality. Now, the state of Utah, this is where one of the 2008 rape kits had matched Rossi's DNA, they actually obtained a sealed arrest warrant for Rossi in September 2020. So at this point, they alert Interpol and law enforcement worldwide, say that he might be on the run under various names. Indeed, at this point, Rossi has a long list of aliases, which he's ready to deploy. He had been Nicholas Alaverdian in Rhode Island, Nicholas Rossi in Ohio and Utah, and in Europe, he was known as Arthur Knight, apparently an eccentric Irish widower. Also, he'd used some variations, so Nicholas Brown, Nicholas Knight, and Arthur Brown. Now, investigators later said they identified at least a dozen aliases Rossi had used over the years to evade capture. Now, a break comes in the case in October 2021. Now, by this time, Rossi and Miranda have moved from Bristol to Glasgow. So they've gone from Bristol, where she obviously has come from, to Glasgow, which is in Scotland. At this point, Rossi pretends to be a professor. He's really going for it. Tells the neighbours he was writing a book on religious education. You can see just kind of creating this persona of, imagine what a nice guy he is. He's writing on religious education. What a non-threatening individual. A professor. Who wouldn't want a professor of this ill living next to them? Also, now he's faking an English accent. He's altered his appearance, so he's dyed his hair blonde. He also grew a handlebar moustache. Despite lying low, though, he can't help wanting a bit of attention, can he? Because he's got a massive ego. So the neighbours said he just wanted you to know he was there. At this point, he also gets gravely ill with coronavirus. He gets hospitalised at Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow. So he is really sick at this point. He ended up in the ICU. He was on a ventilator for weeks, which would have been very, very painful for him on a recovery level. Now, the hospital staff, they did initially know him as Arthur Knight, but those staff felt things didn't add up. First of all, he'd got these really distinctive tattoos. He actually had a barcode and a bird's wing on his arms, even some scarred areas that looked like he'd attempted to remove tattoos. And guess what? Those markers matched the fugitive description from Interpol bulletins for Rossi. So He stands out. And someone at that hospital thinks, I've seen these before. I love the idea that there's hospital staff watching around just hoping that one of those things they'll have seen on Interpol sites or on Britain's Most Wanted is going to pay off. And in this case, it did, because somebody at the hospital tipped off the authorities. Now, on the 13th of December 2021, Police Scotland, who are working with Interpol, they swoop in, they arrest Arthur Knight right at the hospital bedside, and fingerprints were taken, and they quickly confirmed his identity as Nicholas Rossi. So they were biometric matched to prints on file from his prior arrests. Now, bear in mind, at the time of his arrest, he's still really ill with COVID, and all the initial court appearances were conducted via video link from his hospital bed. Now, once he is recovered from COVID, Rossi basically just attempts to fight extradition from Scotland to the US. What followed is just unbelievable. It's a year and a half of what can only be described as theatrical courtroom drama in Edinburgh, because Rossi is saying, you're wrong, it's not me. Sorry? Let's just run through that with me again. Yeah, what I'm saying is it's not me. Yeah, but it is you. No, it's not me. I'm not him. I'm Mr. Knight. I'm a professor of religious education. I'm writing a book. Yes, but it is you because we've got your fingerprints. No, you haven't. You haven't got my fingerprints. You've got fingerprints, but they're not my fingerprints. We took them from your fingers. No, you didn't. No, we did. I took them from your fingers. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. I wasn't even there. I wasn't there. You don't know me. I'm going to leave now because you're all wrong. Genuinely, who in the right mind can do this? It's literally his fingerprints. He's got his fingerprints. They took his fingerprints. They matched the fingerprints. But no, it's just going with even though that's all there, even though that all happened, I'm not accepting it. It's not real. And during this period of time, he really went to great lengths. I mean, method acting is probably something that we could say he succeeded in for a period of time, at least in his own head. He donned an oxygen mask. He was in a wheelchair. He put on a really heavy fake accent. And he said he was Arthur Knight, an Irish orphan who never set foot in America. I kid you not. This literally happened. He's just thinking, I'm going to do this. I'm going to just boss this out. I'm going to convince the world that they're all wrong in spite of everything that clearly indicates that I am actually the person they're looking for. And I'm going to make them feel that, no, I am Arthur Knight. I'm just this poor Irish orphan. And they're all being cruel to me. I've never even been to America. What do you want about? Now, the first Scottish court hearing came just before Christmas 2021. At this point, Rossi was still in hospital. On the 23rd of December, he was actually granted bail by a judge pending full extradition proceeding. I don't think that judge really listened to any common sense that anybody would have put forward, because why would you let somebody who's constantly trying to be a master of disguise, who's constantly conning people, is wanted in America for really serious crimes, why would you grant them bail? If they are not a flight risk, I don't know what would be. Now, the court apparently did this because they thought he'd remain in hospital for some time. But of course, what does Rossi do? Immediately tries to leave. Now, even before the bail hearing, Rossi attempted to arrange a private ambulance and source portable oxygen because he wanted an early discharge. Just one day after getting bail, he checked himself out of hospital against medical advice and tried to run. I say run, I don't mean in the physical way of running. Obviously, he was still in a wheelchair. He wouldn't have been able to. He was very ill. But he did hire a private taxi. Now, on the 20th of January 2022, this is the second arrest after he skipped a scheduled court check-in. At this point, finally, his bail is revoked. He's then remanded into custody to prevent further escape attempts. Now, throughout early 2022, Rossi and what can I describe this as? His revolving door of defence lawyers, because, you know, they come, they go. They come, they go. They just use so many delay tactics and just melodrama to stall the extradition process. He fires, he replaces multiple attorneys. He's often saying, listen, they're not representing my innocence correctly. You are not representing my innocence correctly. Well, it's really hard because they have your fingerprints on file. I am telling you, I am an Irish orphan and you are just not taking this seriously. No, I'm really struggling to find a way of defending you because all the evidence, you're fired. You're fired. I'm going to find somebody else who's going to understand that I am indeed this Irish orphan. Go. That kind of thing delays. Now, those hearings are repeatedly rescheduled, and then in April 2022, Rossi asks for more time, complains about his representation. The presiding judge is getting annoyed now. They're growing impatient. And in fact, at one point, they did refuse postponements. They insisted that the extradition hearing proceed as scheduled. Now, Rossi responded to this by just not going to court. Just not going to go. No, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go. It's not happening. Just going to sit here. It's not happening. June 2022, he actually missed a key hearing by submitting a doctor's note claiming he was bedridden with a mysterious chronic illness. And I have this very strange illness, doctor. What is it? It's mysterious. Well, it's just that you don't look very ill. That's how mysterious it is. It's so mysterious that only I know what it is. It's chronic, though. It's chronic. It's very, very chronic. It's a chronic, mysterious illness, and I need you to write that note. I'm not sure what it is. Just write the note, doctor. I'm an Irish orphan. Just write the note. The doctor probably just got bored and thought, I'm going to write the note. In fact, it probably wasn't a doctor who was writing it. He was probably just getting one of the cellmates to just put it together, and then they'd figure out some kind of email opportunity with the outside world so he could just fabricate a doctor's note. Who knows? But essentially, he was bedridden with a mysterious chronic illness. I say doctor's note. It was probably just written on a bit of bed sheet and ripped out of the bed and just handed to the judge in court. Also, another time, he claimed a COVID infection, so he didn't have to appear, even though he'd already been in hospital with COVID. But at that time, the world had gone mad. He said the word COVID, people put crosses out and you weren't allowed anywhere near them. Now, prosecutors pointed out that when the police actually went to collect a DNA sample, he just refused to cooperate. He didn't give fingerprints until he was forced to by a court order. This guy is relentless. He doesn't care about the law. He just cares about getting whatever it is he wishes to achieve, which at this point is not being extradited to face the consequences of his actions in America.
Of course, to deny that he's Nicholas Rossi, the man who's the subject of the extradition requests, who we know was born in the USA and is a US citizen, affidavit of Ms Johnson at paragraph 34, and who the court has already found him to be. And he continues to maintain that he's an Irishman, adopted at birth, long resident in the United Kingdom, and who has never set foot in the United States. He has, with medical professionals and in court, avoided questions about his childhood and upbringing. I conclude because that is a canvas on which he has not yet chosen to paint, although he has asserted various psychiatric ailments which ultimately could not be established without the history that he has chosen not to share. I conclude that he is as dishonest and deceitful as he is evasive and manipulative. Those unfortunate facets of his character have undoubtedly complicated and extended what is ultimately a straightforward case. The person appearing before me is Nicholas Rossi, the person whose extradition is requested by the United States. The court will adjourn.
Now, Rossi didn't help himself with his behaviour either outside the extradition process, because on the 6th of July 2022, this is whilst he's at a Glasgow hospital, he's arrested for threatening and abusing the medical staff. Now, witnesses said that although he's pretending to be frail, he's using a wheelchair, he's feigning an inability to stand, when the staff say, "You're fit for discharge," he's that annoyed by the fact that he's fit for discharge, he gets out of bed, charges at the nurses, suddenly, miraculously can walk. Another doctor also noted that Rossi had faked seizures. He'd exhibited no real lung problems despite constant claims of breathing difficulties. On the 7th of July 2022, he ends up being denied bail. And at this point, that's cited as a substantial risk of escape attempts being the reason behind it. But Rossi remanded to jail, then was forced to have his fingerprints taken. Now, at this point, of course, Rossi is remanded to jail. They also forcibly take his fingerprints, essentially, because it's been ordered by the court, and that confirms his identity as Nicholas Rossi. Now, in August 2022, at this point, he's convicted of the hospital attack. He's fined £400, and the judge remarked that Rossi's alleged inability to stand was not credible because he charged at the staff, got out of his bed, didn't seem to have a problem walking. But that's not going to deter him from that kind of method acting. He's going to be in that wheelchair come what may. Late 2022, the Scottish courts had run out of patience, and on the 11th of November 2022, Sheriff Norman McFadden reviewed fingerprint evidence, photographs, tattoos, and formally declared that on the balance of probabilities, the man in custody is Nicholas Rossi. Now, in civil extradition cases, the balance of probabilities is a standard sufficient to confirm identity. So he's obviously Nicholas Rossi, but that's how you would word it, that the balance of probabilities that they've met that standard. Now, there is one more delay that emerges because Essex Police announced in November 2022 that they were also looking into a rape allegation that could involve Rossi. Now, if England had charged him, one of the things that could have happened is it could have delayed the extradition process. So ultimately, nothing was filed in time. So that extradition process was not delayed. Also, Rossi's bail applications were repeatedly denied throughout 2022 to 2023. And in one of the hearings, Rossi actually had the audacity to complain that he was upset that other inmates were taunting him, were bullying him by singing Leaving on a Jet Plane. Great tune by John Denver. Leaving on a jet plane, don't know if... Well, you won't be seen again in the UK because you're going to be in prison, aren't you, in America when we extradite your kid. Anyway, like I said, this guy is so entitled that he thinks people are going to care about that. Then finally, in August 2023, an Edinburgh court approved Rossi's extradition to the US. The 5th of January 2024, he's flown back to America in the custody of US Marshals. Once back in the US, specifically Utah, Rossi clung briefly to his fake identity. He actually petitioned the court to address him as Arthur Knight out of respect, and the judge respectfully denied that. No, I'm not going to play into your crazy delusion. You're not Arthur Knight. Now, with Rossi finally back in the US, attention turned to the crimes he'd been running from all along, the two 2008 rape cases in Utah. Now, these stemmed from separate incidents in September 2008. The first case involved a 20-year-old woman in Salt Lake County. She was referred to as victim 1. The second case involved a 21-year-old woman in Orem, Utah. That's the woman who reported an assault immediately in 2008. Now, Utah decided to prosecute Rossi in 2 separate trials, one for each victim. Now, these would be held in different counties, and the judges set the dates for August 2025 in Salt Lake County and September 2025 in Utah County. On the 22nd of August 2024, Rossi finally dropped the pretense and officially abandoned his claim of mistaken identity. In October 2024, he actually went further. He confessed to faking his own death and assuming false identities. He claimed that he only did this because of early years of traumatic abuse in foster care and because he'd received 2 credible death threats, apparently, from unnamed Rhode Island officials around 2018. Well, maybe he did, because he kept threatening he was going to accuse them of a rape and so on and so forth. Now, when it came down to the trial in Salt Lake County, it began on the 11th of August 2025. He, at this point, appeared pale. He was in a wheelchair. He was again wearing an oxygen tube. That trial lasted 3 days. The judge who presided over it was Barry G. Lawrence. The prosecution was DA Sam Gill, Deputy DA Brandon Simmons, and the defense was Samantha Duggan. Now, in the opening statements, the prosecution basically painted a picture of this intelligent man who used his charm to take advantage of a vulnerable woman. He raped her when she pushed back against his attempts to control her. The defense, of course, they sought to convince the jury that the alleged victim built up years of resentment after Rossi made her foot the bill for everything in their month-long relationship, and that she accused Rossi of rape to try to get back at him a decade later when she saw him in the news. I mean, it was a month. She was footing the bill for a month. You're saying that that's going to create resentment that's a decade later going to flow over and be like, I'm going to accuse him of rape. I mean, that is just not going to go down well with the jury, is it? Now, victim 1 was brought in by the prosecution. She didn't want to be known. She wanted to be anonymous, but she was able to identify him in court. She said, he's a little bit heavier, a little bit older, aren't we all? She described meeting Rossi online in November 2008. She was recovering from a brain injury suffered in a car accident. It was a whirlwind relationship, as we'd expect. These kind of coercive perpetrators always want to hook you in. She said the first date they had was on her birthday. She said he was really charming. He seemed very interested in school and politics and music, and he was just really nice to me. She said that she was always the one who came up for money for dates, to fix a tyre, even $1,000 to help Rossi avoid being evicted from his apartment. She had him over for Thanksgiving dinner with the parents. Then on the Black Friday, they went to the Gateway Mall where they looked at engagement rings, and she said he didn't have the credit score to get the rings, so I had to co-sign on them. Now, they'd only been dating for 2 weeks, but she was looking for marriage. And she did buy the rings. She also started wearing hers. And Rossi was pushing for her to marry him in a temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, this was even in spite of the fact that she was drifting away from her faith personally. She also said that he drank and he smoked during the relationship that was deteriorating and it was bothering her. She said he was becoming really controlling. He was saying really mean things to her. And then on the night of the actual crime of the rape, Rossi said something rude to her. So she just took the ring off. She threw it in a purse. She walked to the car. Now he follows her. He's yelling, he's pounding on the exterior of the car. And finally, she let him in to drive him home. She said he was just yelling at me the whole time on the way back to his house. But when he calmed down, she obviously agrees that she'll go inside because she thinks it's okay. Now, the prosecution said, were you thinking about going inside to rekindle the relationship? She said, no, I was more to the point of let's end it. Now, when they go into his bedroom, she said he pushes her down onto the bed, holds her down, and forces her to have sex with him. And she was so scared, she just froze. Then when she left the house, she thought, I'm never going to see him again. Now, Rossi did communicate with her afterwards, and it meant that she ended up changing her phone number that week because she was just desperately trying to wean him off talking to her. She said, I was a little bit more of a timid person back then, so it was really hard for me to stand up for myself. She testified that she did exchange some emails, but she never actually saw him in person again. She also sold her engagement ring to someone else, but she did ultimately have to pay for both the rings she co-signed for. Now, a few weeks later, she ended up taking Rossi to a small claims court. She said as soon as that happened, he started harassing me. He sent me a cease and desist. And so she said, I just ultimately dropped the small claims court proceeding. And I told my parents that I'd been assaulted, but apparently her father made a rude comment and dismissed her. So that really put her off going to the police. And she felt that the reaction of her parents was enough to just make her feel like it wasn't appropriate to do that. She probably wouldn't get the help that she needed off the authorities if her own parents weren't going to support her. Now, like I said, she never spoke to Rossi again. However, 2022, she's doing the classic doom scrolling on her phone and she sees the news about Rossi in Utah County. At this point, she goes ahead, texts a friend, and her friend helps her reach out to the authorities. Now, under cross-examination, she does acknowledge that she had never experienced any type of physical abuse from Rossi before that argument and the alleged rape, insisted that she had let him know the relationship was over and that he took her in spite of saying no. But like clearly isn't trying to say he was some physically abusive partner, just is being very clear he raped her. Now, the victim's mother, a woman called Tammy Sadler, she actually recalled how upset her daughter was. One of the reasons she was upset was because he owed her the money for the wedding bands that she'd bought for them both. And she said during that conversation, her daughter did disclose to her that she'd been raped. And after that mother stepped down from the witness stand, she actually stopped and she just glared at Rossi. Very powerful. She might have let her daughter down initially, but obviously on reflection regrets that and wanted to let him know that she was there to see him go down. Now, victim 2, before she could testify, Judge Lawrence pointed out to the jury that her account was separate from the case being tried, and she gave a really similar account to victim 1. She said she was 21 when she met him online. The relationship moved really too fast for her liking. Money also became an issue. She said, I'd pay for everything when we did go out. It just got progressively worse. Then after she broke up with Rossi, he apparently called to say that he had the money to pay her back. Great, she thinks. She goes to the apartment, she goes to get her cash back, and then when she gets there, he sexually assaults her. Now, on cross, the defence read a police report in which they say showed she'd actually gone to dinner with Rossi after he assaulted her. With respect, lots of victims do things like that, particularly if they've had a relationship with the person because they're thinking to themselves, did it actually happen? Did I ask for it? That is not unusual. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. Now, Officer James Thompson was brought into court, testified that Rossi filed his own sexual assault report against victim 2 in September 2008, claiming that she raped him. I kid you not. Also stated that Rossi claimed the victim would stay at his flat for days at a time, refusing to leave. That is projection of the highest level. Now, they bring into court Rossi's ex-roommate, Eric Sexlexois. He admitted, look, I don't like Rossi. He was really clingy, he was really annoying, and he once called the police on me saying I'd stolen money from him. So basically bringing him in as a character witness and a very poor character witness, so to speak, but also that chain of causation. This guy is a con artist. This guy falsely accused people, including his roommate, which is really important because he's now falsely accusing a victim of rape. Now, the defense, they tried to bring Rossi in to testify on his own behalf, but he refused. And with respect, the defense team only needed an hour to present its case because they didn't have one. Simple as that. Walk into court and say, ladies, gentlemen, jury, judge, we have nothing for you. Nothing. Just nothing. There is nothing, there is nothing, there is nothing. I rest my case, Your Honour. Now, one of the slightly embarrassing things that they do in court is they actually play the police interview in which Rossi spoke in a fake British accent and where he's lying about his identity. So the jury literally get to listen to him being the massive con artist and liar that he is. And that's just going to destabilise any trust they may have had in his story, which they wouldn't likely have had. But nonetheless, it's just the nail in the coffin. Also, victim one's father is brought into court. He talks about the fact that his daughter had suffered a brain injury in a 2008 car accident. He also mirrored what was said about the fact the relationship absolutely moved too fast. He said, yes, they were engaged, but she'd financed her own engagement ring. She was financially responsible for this, and that he and his daughter got into quite a lot of rows about the fact that she had bad life choices. Also, the two apparently, whilst he was giving evidence in court, were actually estranged. That didn't have anything to do with Rossi, but he's obviously there to say, yes, what she said about their relationship was indeed true. And that's quite powerful when they're not even in a relationship at that point as father and daughter. Now, when it came down to the verdict, that happened on the 14th of August 2025. And guess what? Yes, they found him guilty of rape. Now, he didn't show any reaction. So he faces 5 years to life in prison on this count, which is Utah's penalty for first-degree felony rape. That sentencing is now scheduled for 20th of October 2025. Now, Salt Lake County DA Sim Gill said, "We are grateful to the survivor in this case for her willingness to come forward years after this attack took place. We appreciate her patience as we work to bring the defendant back to Salt Lake County so that this trial could take place and she could get justice. It took courage and bravery to take the stand and confront her attacker to hold him to account." Absolutely. For rape victims, actually going through the re-traumatization of being in front of the predator who hurt you, who harmed you, who changed your life, it is absolutely re-traumatizing. And yet when women and men who endure these horrendous experiences come forward and do that, it isn't just reinforcing to other victims that you can get guilty verdicts. It's also about being absolutely clear in your own mind that you were indeed a victim. It confirms that, and it's so powerfully important. So yes, it's re-traumatizing. Yes, it can be humiliating. Yes, you can feel just absolutely attacked by the defense. But equally, it's about you standing there and saying, no, this happened, and I know my truth. And when you have that confirmed by a guilty verdict, it can be transformative in spite of the traumatization you go through doing that. Isn't this case one that blows your mind? This is nature-nurture combined, isn't it? I believe that Rossi was born with a predisposition to be a cheat, to be a con artist, to be a manipulative Machiavellian liar, to have antisocial features within his personality, but then he was placed in the perfect position for all of those negative features to be activated through the exposure that he had as a young person. I can feel sorry for him as a child. I can't feel sorry for him as the adult rapist that he grew into. And yet I do feel that empathy for the young man who was just moved around from pillar to post and never felt safe and was abused, no doubt. They are the things that should never happen on society's watch. That is a failure on every single level. And that failure certainly contributed to the crimes that ended up being played out by him as an adult. It's shocking, isn't it? I'm sure some of the footage that I've put in blows your mind, because it is quite incredible listening to a guy who, in spite of the fact that the whole world knows he is who he is, refuses to accept that he is indeed that very person. It took him right until he got in the carts back in America for him to actually say, I am Nicholas Rossi. What a journey. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, guys. As ever, mind-blowing. See you again next time. Be safe.